Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Paul Golan. I'm executive director of the Society for Humanistic Judaism, and this is our monthly Rabbis Cantors series, the Parsha of the Month Club. And this is a feature, a benefit for members of SHJ directly, our independent members, as well as members of our affiliated communities throughout the US and Canada. And it's a one way that we want to serve our members directly as a thank you. Much of our content is provided free and open to everybody, but we can't do what we do without the support of donors and members of the Society for Humanistic Judaism and our affiliated communities. So this is just one program that we offer. It's recorded, it's posted to YouTube for folks who want to watch it afterwards, and that's open to everybody. But for participation live, where you get to interact and ask questions, this is reserved for members and donors of our movement. We thank you so much for helping us do what we do. And today we are especially excited to welcome Rabbi Jeffrey Schesnol. I'll read his bio and then I'll turn it over. So Rabbi Jeffrey Schesnol has been the ceremonial and spiritual leader of Oradam Congregation for Humanistic Judaism in Phoenix, Arizona since 2012. Last November, he and his family moved to Porto, Portugal, where he is studying Sephardic Judaism and the history of Jews in the Iberian Peninsula of Spain and Portugal. Porto was a gateway to safe havens for fleeing Jews in World War II, and today is home to two Jewish museums owned and operated by the Kaduri Orthodox Jewish community, a Jewish history museum and the only Holocaust museum in Iberia. In Phoenix, Rabbi Jeffrey has been serving at Oradam virtually via Zoom. In Porto, he is engaged with the Hamakom Progressive Pluralistic Reform Congregation, a member of the World Union for Progressive Judaism, where he has been participating in seasonal holiday and Shabbat celebrations. He is also working with the Kaduri's organizations in funding development and communal events. Rabbi Jeffrey continues his humanistic Jewish endeavors, contributing to IASHJ literature and videos and developing humanistic texts in Portugal. Thanks so much for being here. I'm going to put you on spotlight and turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Paul, and thank you all for attending and hopefully participating after my initial comments about the parshat that are included in this presentation. And I know it takes time out of your day, and it is appreciated because it gives us an opportunity for learning, and education are the cornerstone of our work and our careers. So the parshat, actually, there are three included in this particular section for my presentation today, which these essentially start with the beginning of the book of Leviticus, which is the third book of the Torah. Uh, Traditionally, it's called Vayikra, which means he, the Lord, called. It's named because that is the very first word in the book. It was also called Torat Kohanim, which means instructions for the priests. In rabbinic times, uh, it took on also a, a, a word called Leviticon, which means all things pertaining to the Levites, who were the priests, which was the main thrust and the main element of these parshat. Um, and it covers all the things for which the priests were responsible. Of course, priestly Judaism was the cornerstone of biblical Judaism, and it wasn't until rabbinic Judaism replaced priestly Judaism that all changed after 70 of the Common Era, after the destruction of the Second Temple. For context, Leviticus is part of a very long narrative that actually begins back in chapter 25 of the book of Exodus, the preceding book of Leviticus, preceding the book of Leviticus, And it continues on all the way to Numbers, the subsequent book, chapter 10. And in total, this entirety is referred to as when the tabernacle stood at Sinai. It begins with God's instructions to Moses to provide this portable residence for the divine presence and to consecrate Moses' brother Aaron and his sons as priests. It also was the location for God to kind of hang out and have his regular meetings with Moses, where he would indicate what the laws were that were to be imparted and shared with the people of Israel. And the name for this location is also referred to biblically as the tent of meeting, meeting meaning meeting of Moses and God. The tabernacle and all its privileges um, assumed a residence there at the foot of Mount Sinai, and that's where the priests were consecrated, and all sacrificial worship commenced there, uh, and all the laws were conveyed there, and the instructions were given to the Israelites at that location. So a lot, a lot of the narratives in these three parshat get very, very specific and very, very detailed as to uh, priestly sacrificial responsibilities and duties. Um, Interestingly, this tabernacle stands at the center of the Torah. And although it takes up almost a third of the entire Torah readings over the year, um, the in which these readings are read in the synagogue, it indicates its traditional importance because of that large slice of time. But while it takes that enormous portion the of the readings of passages from the Torah in the traditional temples, um, it actually is a rather short time in terms of the time span it covers in the biblical narrative. Since it begins with end of Exodus, going all the way into Numbers, uh, the the first portion of it begins on the first day of the Hebrew month of Nisan, first month of spring, and extends all the way when it goes into Numbers into the first day of the Hebrew month of Iyar. So the entire book of Leviticus, well, it takes up a third of the time in the temple readings. It covers only 1 month out of the Hebrew calendar. Modern biblical scholars have indicated when they study the various portions of the Torah and when it was uh, codified and when it was actually written, as known as the P source. Um, and I don't want to get into the whole study of the complete Bible here, so I'm going to stick with what came into being as early as uh, the 6th century of before the Common Era, actually around the time of the Babylonian exile. Early on, Leviticus was crucial to rabbinic learning, and halachic midrash was just simply called uh, the book. It was always referred to that way. And it was even customary for children when they were beginning their studies of their Judaism that they start rather than chronologically with Genesis, that they actually begin their studies with Leviticus because it is indicated that it's because it was for purity, but it would seem more likely that it was because it contains most of the laws which supposedly a Jewish person is commanded to observe on a regular basis. So pragmatically, children's programs of study began with the practical knowledge required for a life of mitzvot. And so uh, these essentially were indicated to follow the ways of God, um, who performed acts of kindness and godliness. But I will get into what that may or may not cause in the way of a backlash in a couple of minutes. When the Pharisaic rabbis succeeded in displacing the Sadducee priestly leadership after the Roman destruction of the Second Temple in 70 of the Common Era, ritual prayer replaced sacrifice. And so the rabbis took over from the priests in terms of leadership. Whether you care to call it a power play or you call it a reflection of what was physically accessible due to the destruction of that temple, uh, it depends on how you view the Torah and its purposes uh, for which it was written. But essentially, um, the change from people bringing sacrifices to priests to offer up for a whole variety of reasons for trying to supplicate and to please God and wish for bountiful agrarian uh, availability of a good harvest or pastoral in terms of birthing of lambs, whether or not that is what was required, or if there were requests for alleviation and being excused from certain certain things that were done that violated rituals or actual commitments of crime in which people asked the priest to offer these sacrifices uh, as a reparation for misdeeds. Um, the idea that the priests controlled the whole process, and that changed after the destruction of the Second Temple. And the rabbis created very specific fixed times for prayer in the synagogues, and and uh, and so people not only were not having priests offer sacrifices, but in essence, people then were communicating directly through prayer to God. Um, and so um, there are a lot of works done by scholars that try and explain this major shift. And I believe Ellis Rifkin at HUC referred to it as the Pharisaic Revolution. So it was, in fact, a gigantic change. And people who don't understand the fact that Judaism's principal uh, ongoing continuum is a reflection of adaptation and change only have to look at this enormous shift that took place, uh, to fully understand that things we're doing today, by comparison, are almost minor compared to gigantic historic shifts that took place during this time. So it's also said that essentially, when the priests were offering these sacrifices to praise God or to excuse every offense committed on behalf of human beings, it is said that there's no clearer articulation of the reason for the Jewish people's existence than God having entered a relationship with the Israelites so that they would, in perpetuity, sanctify his name. Their role in the world and in history was to attest to God's existence, to publicize his oneness, and to advertise his greatness. They were God's PR instrument. Um, and so they were commanded to, to do this by worshiping God and keeping his laws. And if they failed to do so, his name is profaned, meaning his fame is diminished and his reputation tarnished if they fail to live up to their charge and duty of Hebrew biblical commandments. Uh, Biblical Judaism, biblical God, is the source and the owner and the purveyor of all that ever was, that is, or ever will be in traditional Judaism. And human beings are instructed very clearly to sanctify his name, praise him, exalt him, petition him, because, as the specific wording is, God is all powerful and abundant in kindness, despite some actions that would belie that description. If God is pleased with people's supplications, he'll reward them. If they disobey God's rigorous commandments, he'll be angry and will punish them. This is not unlike other gods in other cultures or monarchs in other stories who display the same kind of behavior. And so, with that in mind, this overall monthly parshat, these three parshat that are actually included, they are Vayikra, Tzav, and Shemini. And the three of them are kind of a trilogy in a way. Vayikra is almost a prequel in a way, and it is specific offerings of sacrifice and the procedures for offering them, and a lot of the regulations associated. And in that section, there is a bit of a foreshadowing of what happens if there is priestly guilt and the repercussions that might occur, which is what I want to talk about more specifically than anything else. The second Parsha, Tzav, is a very detailed priestly protocol and ritual description, somewhat gory and uh, bloody, and it gets very, very specific. Um, and The third section is the Parsha of Shemini, which is Leviticus 9:1 through Leviticus 11:47. And this essentially deals with the dedication of the tabernacle and the behavior expected within it. Um, and so, for reasons that will become apparent, I'm going to focus specifically on Shemini 10:1 through 11, regarding Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu. So uh, these were two of Aaron's four sons. So I'm going to quote the biblical text specifically, and I am using for this the JPS Hebrew English Tanakh, um, and it reads, beginning in Shemini 10:1. Now Aaron's sons Nadab and Abihu each took his fire pan, put fire in it, and laid incense upon it, and they offered before the Lord, alien fire, alien fire, which he had not enjoined upon them. It continues, and fire came forth from the Lord and consumed them. Thus they died before the Lord. So it's clear these two sons, Nadab and Abihu, put alien fire into the sacrificial offering, which they were not uh, supposed to do. And as a result, um, they were struck down and died by fire directly from God. Harsh. Continuing, then Moses said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord meant when he said, Those near to me, though those near to me I show myself holy and to gain glory before the people." So Aaron, and it says, Aaron was silent, totally silent, said nothing. Continuing, Moses called Mishael and Elizaphan, who were sons of their uncle Uzziel. That's, uh, that's Moses, Aaron, and Miriam's uncle, and said to them, "Come forward and carry your kinsmen away from the front of the sanctuary to a place outside the camp." They came forward and carried them out of the camp by their tunics, as Moses had ordered. And Moses said to Aaron and his sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, "Do not bare your heads and do not rend your clothes, lest you die and anger strike the whole community." So not only do your brothers get killed, but you're not allowed to grieve for them. And he says, "Your kinsmen, all the house of Israel, shall bewail the burning that the Lord has wrought." So God has made it very clear he's not fooling around here. Continues with, "And so do not go outside the entrance of the tent of the meeting, lest you die, for the Lord's anointing oil upon you." And they did as Moses had bidden. And the Lord spoke to Aaron, saying, "Drink no wine or other intoxicant, you or your sons, when you enter the tent of meeting, that you may not die." So this is worse than prohibition. This is pretty severe. "And this is a law for all time throughout all ages." As it comes to a conclusion, "For you must distinguish between the sacred and the profane, and between the unclean and the clean. And you must teach the Israelites all the laws which the Lord has imparted to them through Moses." And that concludes Shemini 10:11. And the whole balance of Shemini 10:12 through 11:20 basically then continues with Moses and Aaron's clarifications for other minutiae, other laws that concern proper disposal of sacrificial offerings and consumption of them, because the Levites or the priests didn't own land, they were in charge of the offerings, and so they essentially lived off of the food uh, that was garnered from the sacrifices. So, in this section, in this punishment, and in this particular area of Nadav and Abihu and their crime and their immediate deaths, there is a subsequent verse in Leviticus 16:1, in which it indicates the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron who died when they drew too close to the presence of the Lord. Interesting language. So in Leviticus 10:1 through 11, Aaron's sons Nadav and Abihu were consumed by fire from the Lord for offering unauthorized fire. It's referred to as strange fire in their censers, their incense burners, which was contrary to divine command. This account, I thought it was kind of interesting, is somewhat reminiscent in a way in the story of Prometheus, and uh, where Prometheus gave unauthorized fire to man, which angered Zeus, for which Prometheus paid the dear price of being chained to a mountain and having his liver pecked out every night, and then it regrew and it continued through eternity. In other words, a very severe punishment for failing to listen to the command of God. And interestingly, in the biblical story, um, the instructions that their bodies were to be immediately removed for the offense because they had brought unauthorized fire into the tabernacle. The fire came directly from the Lord, as it says. The strange spirit, in broader theology, strange fire can be interpreted as trying to reach God through means other than God Himself. In other words, instead of having a relationship with God, instead going through other rituals rather than the relationship, which of course is the supplication in which the person is serving God's requests and requirements. And so we know that Moses commanded Aaron and his remaining sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, not to mourn. He said, do not uncover heads or rend clothes, or leave the tabernacle lest they die. So um, subsequent commands following the deaths of Aaron's sons, um, there was this additional prohibition. And it says, the Lord instructed Aaron and the priests not to drink wine or any strong drink when serving in the tent of meeting to avoid death. So this was to ensure that they could properly distinguish between the holy and the common, and between the clean and the unclean. So because God immediately follows the event with a ban on priests drinking alcohol, the strange fire may symbolize the lack of judgment, the lack of spiritual sobriety, if you will, um, and that it might cloud their behavior with literal strong drink or even spiritual intoxication. So, um, and why is it important? Because the priests were teaching all of the Israelites the statutes that were provided by the Lord. And at the conclusion of this, we have to deal with the fact that Aaron stayed silent, showing his submission to God even in his grief. So his sons have just been killed, but says absolutely nothing. And we know in other instances and other stories, both Moses and Aaron spoke up to God for various things, but in this instance, nothing at all. And the term strange fire, which in the Hebrew is Esh Zarah, Leviticus 10:1, carries deep symbolic and theological significance beyond just a literal ritual error. The exact physical nature of their their mistake is debated. Big surprise, there's not a total consensus. By using common coals, perhaps, for the burnt offering, instead of those from the holy altar, the spiritual symbolism centers on the idea of unauthorized or profane worship. So human innovation versus divine revelation comes into thought and mind here. Strange fire symbolizes the danger of approaching God through human creativity, personal preference, or cultural relevance, rather than following God's specific instructions. It represents an attempt to define for one's self how to worship the Creator. Worse yet, acting as God is unforgivable. And in using the Hebrew word in the text zar, which means foreign or outside, it also can mean profane. In using the word zar, symbolically, Nadab and Abihu brought something common into a sacred place, polluting the sanctuary with non-sanctified material. Some commentators suggest the fire symbolized the spirit of pride or entitlement, uh, having having been elevated to priesthood, the sons may have acted out of a desire for self-display rather than humble service. In other words, they were performing actions of their own volition, acting as God. And was that the reason that God was so angered at them that he put them to death? And if that is the case, under that principle, how is a traditional Jewish person supposed to elevate oneself to be with God, as it is said, and in what location, in what manner is one expected to sanctify and praise God to be worthy of God's countenance? So we do remember that biblical Judaism was priestly, uh, and the the people brought their sacrifices to the priests to offer on their behalf, whereas Rabbinic Judaism replaced those intermediaries with direct communication with God via prayer. And the proof text for the rabbis was that it was the oral law uh, that resides in the synagogue rather than the written law of Sinai and in the tabernacle. Karaites claim that rabbis were violating the written Torah law. In Deuteronomy 4:2, it says, quote, Do not add to the things which I command you, and do not take away from them. Keep the commandments of Yahweh and Elohim, which I command you. Do not go astray from the things they shall tell you, not to the right and not to the left. Maimonides said, um, there are commandments which were innovated after the Torah was given, legislated by the prophets and sages, which spread throughout all of Israel, that one must accept and keep all of these commandments, because the Torah tells us in Deuteronomy 7:11, according to the law they instruct you, and according to judgment they say to you, you shall do. You shall not divert from the word they tell you, either to the right or the left, and that accepting them does not constitute adding to the Torah. So, how are we to base our ethical behavior vested in the Western legal concept of moral turpitude and conduct that gravely violates accepted community standards, acts inherent that may be considered inherently vile or dishonest, but not necessarily illegal, but immoral by the nature of the act. So, and not the violation of law or a statute. How does one essentially elevate their ethical behavior? By being a mensch. So Moses in verse 3 of the Parsha uh, essentially says, among those who are near me, I will be sanctified. He's speaking on behalf of God. It warns those in leadership positions that they have a higher responsibility to reflect God's holiness and will be held to a stricter standard of obedience. Not a stricter standard of behavior, a stricter standard of obedience. And so if it's not nice to fool with Mother Nature, it's certainly unpardonable to fool with God and his holiness. You don't meddle or tamper or experiment thoughtlessly or ignorantly, let alone assume the mantle of the Almighty. So, in terms of godliness, godliness is generally defined as alignment of one's thoughts, words, and deeds with God's standards, um, walking in obedience to his commandments, um, and further, the quality or state or condition of being godly, things such as piety, earnest observance of religious duties, virtues of empathy, helpfulness, generosity, tzedakah, compassion through acts of loving kindness, gimlut chasadim, repairing the world, tikkun olam, and reflecting divine attributes, following in ways of godliness, things like kindness uh, and caring. A colleague of mine in Phoenix, Rabbi Micah Kaplan, bless memory be blessed, of Congregation Or Zion in Scottsdale, Arizona, when I asked him about his definition of godliness, he responded, as he always did to anyone who asked him that, human beings acting with godlike behavior. So, if that represents um, what it means, and if you care to use the phrase, what it means to be godly or to be a mensch, in what way, how would we interpret that? How would we do that humanistically? Because certainly we're not in that situation where we're going to be blindly obedient. And so those commentaries on these parshat and specifically uh, the last involving Aaron's sons, um, I open the floor to discussion and your thoughts and your opinions on godliness, and you are invited to unmute and share what you feel you can provide and interact as is available to you, or put something in the chat.
Great, thank you. So if folks want to come back on video and react, ask questions, I will start. Seems like the punishments were pretty severe about praying the wrong way or sacrificing the wrong way. Was this kind of just do you think it was generated as a kind of exertion of power by the priestly class?
What do you all think? That's not a Southern expression. What do all of you think?
Well, hi, Rabbi. Uh,
Hi,
what I
Jennifer.
found, what I found interesting too, kind of building on that as a question is, where this whole thing starts is really, you said Exodus, and isn't it really not too far after the Ten Commandments and telling you how to live like a good human and how you should live your life and just with all the rules it's like another rule and if you're not obeying and I was just kind of thinking about that um things that to apply to everybody, not just the Jews of be a good person and that kind of thing, and it just the whole thing, it was very interesting.
Well,
So
yes, if you think about the Ten Commandments, five of them essentially deal with how uh, how you interact with God. You shall have
mhm.
no other gods before me, etc. And five with regard to human behavior, action toward each other. Um, as a matter of fact, if you think of the typical symbol in a traditional synagogue of the Ten Commandment tablets, and you have five on one side and five on the other side. And five are how people act with the divine, and five act how people act with other people. So when you think about the Ten Commandments in that regard, it is a divided sense of behavior in that regard. So Aaron's sons were violating their behavior with God, not toward other human beings.
Yeah, that's true, but it was just the severe punishment and
Yeah.
how they're saying, hey, don't murder, don't do this, but okay, it's okay for the rest of us to do it, to do whatever we need to do to get done.
Well, essentially, so the question is, what are we to do? How do we govern our lives? We make decisions for ourselves. We don't blindly follow obediently a prescribed formula for life as dictated by commandments or by God. We follow human behavior that has proven the test of time and how people behave and how they conduct themselves. And so that's the element. And so those scholars who have asked the question, what was really going on here? Why was the judgment so harsh, so severe? Um, um, and then the question is asked, is it because they were essentially assuming the mantle of being godly? Were they acting because they used unauthorized fire?
True.
Or there's another school of thought that says, were they drunk when they went into the tabernacle? Why else would that prohibition about alcohol appear in this particular parsha? Uh,
Alcohol.
so, and some would say, well, maybe Aaron might, forego his sobriety and drown his sorrow in drink, uh, as opposed to questioning God's punishment. And would that be the reason it was introduced here, or is it were Abuhu and not acting out of drunkenness?
It's interesting. I haven't heard that
So
before.
yeah, so
Interesting. Thank you.
it's an interesting passage that has maybe more questions than answers.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Jennifer. And Avi, if he's there.
Thank you. How's it, Portugal?
Shh, we're not talking about Portugal right now.
No, no. But I'll tell you, the people in Portugal are very kind. They're very nice.
Want
They
to go
really
now?
are. Really nice, nice folks. At any rate, other questions, observations, um, amplifications, or observations to share?
I guess for me, um, it it seems, I'm not sure emergent is the right word, but um, maybe a natural set of steps that so I'm thinking about B'Tselem Elohim, right? Um, and um, and so like, how do you like, what does that mean relative to uh, don't become like God, right? Um, but I do think of religion, Judaism, as a structure to guide us, given our very human natures, right? And that I think it's a natural human instinct to want to enforce the structure that we create, right? And that um, this is a sort of a cautionary tale um, to cause us to adhere to this structure that has been defined for us, right? And that it was taken to an extreme, but that's what we do as humans. We tend to take things to an extreme inappropriately. So to me, this seems very human.
If people read the Hebrew Bible as divine revelation, written by God, and therefore every word is absolute and is true, or if people read biblical Judaism as the work of people who wrote their best foot forward at a given period of time, because scholarship has indicated that the compilation of the Hebrew Bible took place over hundreds of years by different authors. What was their goal? What was their purpose in doing this? Was this to create a parable that would then be admittedly extreme, just like a caricature is an extreme of an individual? Is this parable an extreme?
I think that that's how I am reading it or hearing it
Mhm.
from what you have shared with us today. I think, yes, that is what the interpretation that I'm bringing to this.
Thank you.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you.
Other thoughts or comments? If not, I'll turn it
Yes,
back to you, Paul.
yes, I would
Oh, yes,
like to
please.
say, yeah, your reference to at the beginning, or at the beginning of the discussion about the question of the authority of the priests, and was this a way of uh, or part of the means of establishing the authority of the priests? So in the I forget which king it was, but in whose uh, palace or um, a document was found, and the document turns out to be the Torah, and um, and so at this time, I think it was perhaps 8th century, 7th century BCE. Um, the question was still unresolved about uh, establishing high places in the countryside for worship, or having the temple in Jerusalem as the chief place for making sacrifices and uh, you know. So could you address that? Do you have uh, anything to add about that type of possibility, let's say, of establishing the authority of the priests in that context?
Well, we know that from the writings that the first Temple of Solomon was destroyed in 586 by the Babylonians, and that the second temple uh, was destroyed by the Romans in 70 of the Common Era, and that the concept of having a central location was terribly important, and it had to be accessible for all the people, because in the Torah there are three pilgrimage holidays which require the people to go to the central temple. And we know that in Orthodox Judaism today there is only one temple. Um, there are synagogues, but there's only one temple. And the idea that it had to be accessible for as many people as possible to make a pilgrimage for uh, for Passover and Shavuot and Sukkot, which are prescribed, that it had to be available, and that the sacrificial goings on in that location were very important in that regard. So that may reflect on that. The particular parshat that were included in this section in Leviticus dealt only with the tabernacle, which was a temporary one at the foot of Mount Sinai. Before, as the story is told, the journey that took them to the promised land, to Canaan. So I'd say hopefully that might help illuminate that question about the centrality of the temple.
Time for one more question or thought, anybody? I will add that, as Deb mentioned, the concept of in the image of God comes up a lot in the Jewish communal world today when um, advocating for certain social justice positions, and it's always um, challenging for me as someone who believes that God was created in the image of man. And, you know, the idea of godliness as, I think if you use that word, people would automatically apply positive values to it. But here's an example, a Parsha, where God seems punitive and unfair in the punishment for, you know, a poor attempts at worship. So I'm very challenged by even the word godliness, which I think is probably just a generic humanistic reaction to it. I will say that whenever I'm asked to sign on to something that references we were created in the image of God, I ask if they would edit it to say our tradition teaches we were created in the image of God, because that is a factual statement that I can sign our movement on to. And it's often, in fact, used in defense of LGBTQ equality issues. And, you know, so it's done with, I think, the best intentions, but when it's done by the theistic denominations, even the liberal denominations, it's often stated as a fact we were created because we were created in the image of God. And they're more than happy to include my tweak, which is nice and inclusive of them, but it does come up pretty regularly. And this is a really interesting conversation to help kind of better illuminate the challenges I think that I've had with that expression. Jody, did you want to say anything? You came off a video.
Thanks. No, what you were just saying really resonates with me because amongst the rabbinic leadership, we probably pass on signing petitions and acting as signatures or signatories to many statements that are put out because they have such a theistic mindset. And even if we were able to have it changed to say our tradition teaches, we make the suggestions and we're generally ignored. Some of our rabbis are a little bit more active with some of the other organizations in trying to do that. But I would say, and I'm currently president of the Association of Humanistic Rabbis, I would say that more times than not, we are not signing on to things unless it just really, really feels that the importance of it is sky high and the few words are just going to not stop some of us from signing it.
Yeah.
So, you know, I agree with you, you know, the idea of godliness and how do we describe that? And, you know, because for many people, we could just stop at, we are created in the image of other human beings. When you look at another person, they're just like you.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Well, Rabbi Schesnol, thank you so much. This was fascinating as always. And folks, we will be back again next month. You will get an email about the next upcoming session of this. Thank you all so much for being here. Really appreciate it and hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care,
Absolutely.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks a
Thank you
lot.
all.
Bye-bye.